Imagine a silence so dense it seems suffocating. It's not the silence of peace. It's the silence before a storm. A silence that stretches across miles of deep, cold black ocean in the heart of the North Pacific. In that darkness, 6 steel giants advance in precise formation, zigzagging through the waves, invisible to the enemy. No light, no radio signal, only the muffled roar of their engines and the sound of water being split by sharp bows. On their decks, an army of folded wings rests like sleeping predators. More than 300 planes, each with the promise of total destruction. Inside the cockpits, men trained with surgical precision, veterans hardened by years of combat in China, await the order. But this is no ordinary fleet. It is something new, a concept the world has not yet grasped. A weapon so bold and dangerous that the fate of an entire empire depends on it. A force that would not only take the war to the enemy, but redefine naval warfare itself. A single mistake could doom them. A single detection, and the Imperial dream would shatter in the depths of the ocean. But if they could maintain silence, if the element of surprise could be preserved, the blow they would deliver could forever alter the balance of power on the planet. This was the Kidō Butai, Japan's mobile force, the clenched fist preparing to deliver the most daring blow in naval history. To understand the Kidō Butai, we must go back to April 10, 1941. Europe was in flames, and in the Pacific, tensions between Japan and the United States were reaching a fever pitch. Japan, an island nation with desperately limited resources, viewed the American oil embargo as a death sentence. War seemed not only likely, but inevitable. At that time, the naval doctrine of all the great powers was the same. Battleships were the kings of the seas, imposing ships with gigantic guns designed to meet in a decisive battle, a sort of clash of the titans that would determine the victor of the war. Aircraft carriers? They were seen as support weapons, useful for reconnaissance or for weakening the enemy before the great battleship clash. They were scattered among the fleets like secondary pieces on a board dominated by kings and rooks. But some minds in the Imperial Japanese Navy, like Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto and the brilliant strategist Minoru Genda, saw the future differently. They didn't see air power as a backup. They saw it as the primary weapon. They imagined, what if, instead of scattering our aircraft carriers, we concentrated them? What if we, instead of a scratch, we could deliver a knockout blow? It was a radical, almost heretical idea for the time. It meant placing the Navy's most valuable and expensive assets in a single basket. It was an all-or-nothing gamble. But Japan didn't have the luxury of caution. Its industrial capacity was a fraction of America's. They couldn't win a war of attrition. Their only chance was a swift, devastating, and crippling blow. Thus was born the first air fleet, or, as it would be immortalized, the Kidō Butai. It united Japan's 6 largest and most modern aircraft carriers into a single strike formation. They were the veteran Akagi and Kaga, converted from other ship types but with immense capabilities, the agile and swift Tsuruyu and Hiryu, and finally the crown jewels, the newest and most powerful vessels of their kind in the world, the sister ships Shokaku and Zuikaku. Together, these 6 ships could launch over 400 state-of-the-art aircraft at once. It was a concentration of naval air power that no other nation on the planet could match. Japan wasn't just creating a new fleet, it was creating a new way of waging war. But the question hanging in the air, even within the Japanese Admiralty itself, was deadly serious. Why risk placing all air power in a single fist? The answer was simple and terrifying. Japan had a goal that, in its view, justified this deadly gamble. Such a revolutionary weapon required an equally innovative doctrine and men capable of executing it flawlessly. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo was placed in command of the Kidō Butai. Nagumo was not an aviator. He was a traditional officer, a torpedo expert, a cautious bureaucrat, a choice that many, including Yamamoto himself, would later question. But under him were the true architects of Japanese air power. Division commanders like Tamon Yamaguchi, an aggressive warrior and idol to his pilots, and flight strategists like the legendary Mitsuo Fuchida, the man who would personally lead the most daring attacks. The Kidō Butai doctrine was based on perfection of execution and absolute surprise. The training was almost inhumanly brutal. Japanese pilots practiced tirelessly in all weather conditions until taking off from a shaking deck, sailing hundreds of kilometers over the open ocean, and hitting a moving target became a reflex action. The hit rate of its training bombers exceeded 70%, a figure unimaginable for other navies. The attack tactic was a symphony of choreographed destruction. First came the Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters. Light, incredibly maneuverable, and with phenomenal range, their mission was to sweep the skies of any defense, ensuring total air dominance. With the coast clear, the second wave materialized, the Aichi D3A Val dive bombers. They climbed to high altitudes and dove nearly vertically on their targets, dropping their bombs with surgical precision. They were the scalpels of the fleet. Finally, flying low and close to the waves came the Nakajima B5N Kate torpedo bombers. They carried the deadly Type 91 torpedoes, modified for operation in the shallow waters of a harbor. They were the hammers, capable of breaking the back of any battleship. To ensure surprise, the Kidō Butai operated under absolute secrecy. Total radio silence was the rule. Navigation was done by stars in dead reckoning. To cross the vast stretches of the Pacific, they perfected the complex and dangerous maneuver of high-sea replenishment, something the Americans believed they were incapable of doing on a large scale. The fist was ready, the doctrine was refined. All that was missing was the target. On November 26, 1941, the Kidō Butai set sail from isolated Hitokapu Bay in the Kuril Islands, Japan's northernmost and most desolate point. The destination, a point northwest of Hawaii. The crossing was an agonizing test of nerves. For nearly 2 weeks, the world's largest aircraft carrier fleet sailed a rarely used northern route, braving storms and rough seas, completely cut off from the outside world. The fate of the empire rested on Nagumo's ability to remain unseen. In the early morning of December 7, 1941, the fleet reached its point of attack. The sea, previously raging, was eerily calm. The tension on board was immense. On the deck of the Akagi, the flagship, Fuchida and the other pilots participated in a brief ceremony, toasting with sake before climbing into their aircraft. At 6 a.m., under a sky about to clear, Nagumo gave the order. The engines roared to life. One by one, 183 planes of the first wave took off from the 6 carriers, forming a vast armada in the air. Fuchida led the way. As they approached Oahu, he tuned in to a Honolulu radio station. The weather report promised a sunny day. Perfectly clear skies, the announcer said. Fuchida smiled. Upon sighting the coast, he fired a flare. It was the signal for the attack. And then he sent the coded message back to the fleet, a message that would become infamous. Tora, Tora, Tora. Total surprise had been achieved. What followed was chaos. The Vols dove into the airfields, destroying the American planes on the ground before they could take off. The Kates descended on Battleship Corridor, the row of anchored battleships. Their torpedoes ripped through the hulls. The USS Oklahoma capsized, trapping hundreds of men. The USS Arizona was hit by an armor-piercing bomb that detonated its forward ammunition magazine. The ship rose from the water and exploded in a cataclysmic fireball, killing 1,177 crew members instantly. An hour later, the second wave, carrying 167 aircraft, arrived to finish the job. In less than 90 minutes, the Kidō Butai had sunk or severely damaged 18 warships, including 8 battleships, destroyed nearly 200 aircraft, and killed more than 2,400 Americans. American naval power in the Pacific had been decapitated. The world was shocked. Japan was euphoric. The Kidō Butai had executed its plan with brutal perfection. But amid the celebration, there was a critical flaw in its success. The 3 American aircraft carriers of the Pacific Fleet were not in port that day. 3 enemy kings remained on the board. Nagumo, cautious as always, decided not to launch a third wave to destroy the harbor's fuel depots and repair docks, a decision that would prove to be a colossal strategic error. Even so, the message was clear. Pearl Harbor was just the beginning. The Kidō Butai's fist was still clenched and already moving toward other targets on the map. With the American fleet in ruins, the Kidō Butai became the absolute ruler of the Pacific. In the weeks and months following Pearl Harbor, Nagumo's force waged a naval blitzkrieg, sweeping through Southwest Asia to support the Japanese conquest of vital resources. It provided cover for the invasion of the Philippines, Malaya, and the oil and rubber-rich Dutch East Indies. Any Allied force that dared challenge it was summarily annihilated. On February 19, 1942, the Kidō Butai, with 4 of its aircraft carriers, turned its attention south toward Australia. They launched a massive air raid on the port city of Darwin. It was a Pearl Harbor on a smaller scale, but for Australia, it was the largest attack on its territory in its entire history. The attack was even heavier than Pearl Harbor in terms of bombs dropped. Ships were sunk in the harbor, infrastructure was devastated, and panic ensued. It spread across the continent. Australia felt naked and defenseless. The Kidō Butai seemed like a force of nature, a hurricane of steel and fire that moved with impunity. Their pilots were now legendary aces, their ships invincible fortresses. Japanese propaganda transformed them into demigods. With each victory, the aura of invincibility grew. And now, with the Southwest Pacific under control, Yamamoto decided it was time to expand Japanese dominance even further, in a direction no one expected. In early April 1942, the Kidō Butai executed its most audacious operation to date, Operation Sea, a large-scale raid into the Indian Ocean. The objective was terrifying in its ambition: to cripple the Royal Navy's Eastern Fleet, secure the western flank of the new Japanese Empire, and perhaps even incite a rebellion in India against British rule. With 5 of his 6 original aircraft carriers, Nagumo led his force through the Strait of Malacca and into British-held waters. British intelligence, though aware that an attack was imminent, grossly underestimated the scale and ferocity of the approaching force. On April 5th, Kidō Butai aircraft attacked the port of Colombo in Ceylon, present-day Sri Lanka. The Royal Air Force attempted to intercept them and was massacred. At sea, the British tried to disperse their ships to prevent a new Pearl Harbor, but Japanese reconnaissance aircraft were relentless. Spotted two British heavy cruisers, HMS Dorsetshire and HMS Cornwall. Within minutes, more than 80 Val dive bombers descended on the two ships. They were hit dozens of times and quickly sank, taking with them more than 400 sailors. 4 days later, the final blow. On April 9th, the Kidō Butai located its most coveted prize, the British aircraft carrier HMS Hermes. It was sailing without fighter cover. It was a massacre. In less than 10 minutes, the Hermes was hit by about 40 bombs and sank. It was the first time in history that an aircraft carrier was sunk by another in the open sea. In just 10 days, the Kidō Butai had sunk an aircraft carrier, 2 heavy cruisers, 2 destroyers, and more than 20 merchant ships, destroying British naval power in the region and spreading panic from Calcutta to Madagascar. British Admiral James Somerville wrote in his diary, quote, "They are outclassing us in every way." Up to this point, in 6 months of war, the Kidō Butai had sailed tens of thousands of kilometers, destroyed or neutralized 5 battleships, an aircraft carrier, several cruisers, and dozens of other ships and aircraft. All this without losing a single ship. The Kidō Butai didn't seem untouchable. It was untouchable. Its leaders and pilots were consumed by the victory disease, a dangerous mixture of arrogance and a belief in their own invincibility. But, as in Greek mythology, pride always precedes a fall, and the tide was about to turn. May 1942. The next step in the Japanese expansion plan was the capture of Port Moresby, New Guinea, which would put Australia within range of its land-based bombers. To cover the invasion force, Japan sent a portion of the Kidō Butai, the 2 crown jewels Shokaku and Zuikaku, under the command of Admiral Takeo Tagaki. But this time, the Americans were waiting. Thanks to their cryptanalysts who had partially broken the Japanese naval code JN-25, they knew of the plan. Admiral Nimitz sent the aircraft carriers USS Lexington and USS Yorktown to intercept them. What followed was the Battle of the Coral Sea, a historic engagement. For the first time in the war, 2 fleets of aircraft fought without the surface ships ever sighting each other. The battle was fought entirely by their aircraft, over 300 kilometers away. The result was confusing. Tactically, the Japanese won. They sank the large aircraft carrier USS Lexington and severely damaged the Yorktown. In return, they lost only 1 light carrier. But strategically, it was an American victory. The invasion of Port Moresby was cancelled, the first time a Japanese advance had been halted. More importantly, the cost to the elite Kidō Butai was high. The Shokaku was hit by 3 bombs and severely damaged, requiring months of repair. The Zuikaku, though unharmed, had its air group decimated, losing most of its combat-experienced pilots. Replacing these pilots would take time. For the first time, the Iron Fist showed a crack. 2 of its strongest fingers were now out of action. This absence would prove utterly catastrophic in the next decisive major operation planned by Yamamoto, an operation named after a small atoll in the middle of nowhere, Midway. Admiral Yamamoto was obsessed. The American aircraft carriers that had escaped Pearl Harbor haunted his thoughts. He needed to destroy them to secure Japan's defensive perimeter. His Operation MI was a complex, almost Baroque plan designed to be the ultimate trap. He would send a force to attack Midway Island, knowing that the American fleet would be forced to launch its defense. And there, waiting in ambush, would be the main force of the Kidō Butai, with 4 aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, ready for the coup de grace. But Yamamoto's greatest weapon, surprise, was gone. Deep underground in Pearl Harbor, a team of cryptanalysts led by the brilliant and eccentric Commander Joseph Rochefort had completely cracked the JN-25 code. They knew everything: the target, the date, the Japanese order of battle. Admiral Nimitz, rather than fall into the trap, prepared his own. He positioned his 3 available aircraft carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown, the latter hastily patched together in just 72 hours, northeast of Midway, exactly where the Kidō Butai hadn't expected them to be. On the morning of June 4, 1942, the Kidō Butai launched its first attack on Midway Island, as planned. American aircraft based on the island counterattacked the Japanese fleet and were slaughtered by Zero fighters and anti-aircraft artillery. It seemed like another easy victory, but the commander of the Midway attack sent a message to Nagumo. A second wave was needed to neutralize the island's defenses. At that very moment, Nagumo faced a fatal dilemma. His reserve aircraft were armed with torpedoes, ready to attack ships, but there were no ships in sight. Attacking the island required bombs. He gave the order that would seal their fate: disarm the torpedoes and rearm with bombs. On the decks of the Japanese aircraft carriers, frantic work began. Bombs and torpedoes, each weighing nearly a ton, were moved back and forth. Ammunition carts cluttered the hangars. And it was at this moment of maximum vulnerability that a Japanese reconnaissance plane finally spotted the American fleet. Panic. The order was reversed. Stop arming with bombs, rearm with torpedoes. The chaos in the hangars multiplied, and meanwhile, from the horizon, American planes arrived. First came the torpedo bombers. Flying low and slow, they were easy prey for the Zero fighters. Squadron after squadron was decimated. Of 41 torpedo bombers, only 6 survived, without scoring a single hit. It seemed like the Kidō Butai's invincibility would continue, but their sacrifice was not in vain. They lured the Zero fighters away, to low altitude, leaving the sky above the fleet unprotected. And then, at 10:22 a.m., they arrived. Coming out of the sun in a near-silent dive were the SBD Dauntless dive bombers from the Enterprise and the Yorktown. Within 5 minutes, the fate of the war in the Pacific was sealed. 3 bombs hit the Kaga, transforming her deck, packed with planes and fuel, into an inferno. 4 bombs hit the Soryu. A single bomb hit the Akagi, the flagship, but penetrated all the way to the hangar and detonated amidst the torpedoes and bombs, causing a chain reaction explosion that destroyed the ship from within. In less than 5 minutes, 3 of Japan's 4 elite aircraft carriers, the victors of Pearl Harbor, were in flames, doomed. Only the Hiryu, under the command of the valiant Tama Yamaguchi, survived the initial attack. With desperate courage, he launched his remaining planes and managed to find and severely damage the USS Yorktown. But the Hiryu was alone. Hours later, American bombers found her. 4 bombs hit her, and she too began to burn. Yamaguchi, refusing to abandon his post, chose to sink his ship. In a single day, the heart of the Imperial Japanese Navy had been ripped out. The Kidō Butai, as a unified strike force, ceased to exist. The loss at Midway went far beyond the 4 ships. It was a loss of human capital that Japan could never replace. They sank more than 3,000 men with the carriers, including hundreds of the world's most experienced and irreplaceable pilots. These were the aces who had terrorized the Pacific, the graduates of a brutally selective training program that took years to produce a single naval aviator.
The United States, with its immense industrial capacity and mass training programs, could produce new ships and new pilots at a dizzying rate. Japan could not. After Midway, the Kidō Butai never again operated as the unified and fearsome force it once was. The remaining carriers, like the Shokaku and Zuikaku, fought bravely in later battles, such as in the Solomon Islands and the Marianas. But now they were the ones outnumbered, facing a rising tide of increasingly advanced American ships and planes. They were a shadow, a ghost of their former power. The Iron Fist had burst open and its fingers were broken. It would never close again. The final engagements of the remnants of the Kidō Butai were in desperate defensive operations until the last of their legendary ships were finally sent to the bottom of the sea.
The story of the Kidō Butai is a tragedy on high speed. In 6 months, she achieved a level of naval dominance rarely seen in history. She proved, bloodily and irrefutably, that the age of the battleship was over. The Kidō Butai didn't just shape the future of naval warfare, she created it. Her doctrine of concentrated carrier strike became the standard for all navies around the world, a legacy that endures to this day in modern carrier task forces. But her story is also a powerful lesson in the foundations of modern warfare. She demonstrated that courage and tactical brilliance are not enough. Without a robust industrial base, solid logistics, the ability to replace losses, and, crucially, good intelligence, technological superiority and experience can evaporate in a single bad day. The Kidō Butai was born as the most powerful weapon ever seen at sea, an iron fist forged to deliver a single decisive blow. For a brief, shining moment, she seemed invincible, the embodiment of power. Imperial Japanese. But just as she reached the pinnacle of her glory, she was shot down, and in the final irony of the war, she was destroyed by the very element that had made her immortal: carrier-based air power.